Okay, good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Good, thank you. It's 9:30 and this Places for Everyone hearing session is now open. I'm Louise Gibbons, one of the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan, along with William Fieldhouse and Stephen Lee. Just some housekeeping matters first, please. A reminder for everyone to switch your mobile phones, laptops and other devices to silent. I'm looking at Mr. Young in particular, who, just in case you've still got your Christmas music on. Yeah, just a reminder to do that, please. We do have water in the room, which will be topped up during breaks. Please don't bring food or hot drinks into the room. There are no fire alarm tests planned for today, so if the alarm does sound, we need to vacate the building following the green emergency exit signs. And there's an emergency exit through the door that you came in, and there's also one to my right here. If you have any queries about the proceedings during the process, please ask Helen or Yvonne, our programme officers, and I'm sure most of you have met them by now. Just a reminder for those that haven't been before that the purpose of the examination is to help us decide if the plan is legally compliant and sound, and if not, how it could be modified to ensure that it is. The session will be a structured discussion based on the agendas that were published last week. And today we will be dealing with the Greenbelt additions in Bolton, Bury and Wigan. And bearing in mind the weather, what we also intend to do is continue then straight on with Salford and Trafford if we get to that point, rather than just starting at 2 p.m. to allow people to get home safely should they need to. I will explain how I intend to run the sessions in a bit more detail shortly, but just in brief for now, I will invite the GMCA to do an introduction to the Greenbelt additions, and then I will start with questions to the GMCA team, and when I've heard the responses to those, I will invite contributions from others. If you do wish to speak, please turn your nameplate on its end, and there are some nameplates quite far down, so if you can make sure that your name is pointing towards me, and also that the water jugs aren't in the way because they can blur the wording a little bit. Thank you. Please keep your comments brief and focused and limited to 1 or 2 minutes. There's no need to repeat what's in your statements or representations. We have read those. I will give the GMCA the chance to sum up their position at relevant points in the proceedings. Just to let you know as well, I think we are due to hear from Christian Wakeford MP at 10:30. I'll understand he'll be making a statement both about the Bury site allocations and Greenbelt additions. I just need to make it clear for those that are here, we're not going to reiterate any of the discussion that we had on the Bury sites, and I think Mr Wakeford is aware of that, but just as a reminder that I'll listen to his statement, but we're not taking any comments about the sites. We've already heard about those. Before I turn to the agenda, I notice there are a few new faces here. We go through the room and allow participants to introduce themselves, and I'll start with the GMCA team first.
Good morning, ma'am. I'm Chris Katkowski, King's Counsel for the GMCA.
Andrew Chalmers from Bolton for the GMCA.
Good morning, I'm David Wiggins from Bury Council.
Good morning, David Kersley from Wigan Council.
Jackie Copley from the Countryside Charity.
Malcolm Harrison, Chairman of Stocks Residents Association.
John Rigby from the Stocks Residents Association. Thank you.
Councillor Jackie Harris, Councillor from Bury.
Bob Birchmore, Bury Folk, Keep It Green.
Good morning, I'm Carol Birchmore, I'm Councillor for Radcliffe East in Bury.
Good morning, Judy Shepherd, a resident from Radcliffe in Bury. Good morning, Alan Shepherd, a resident from Radcliffe in Bury.
Morning, Councillor Joe Lancaster, Bury Councillor and representing Paul Speak.
Lee Greenwood from Connolly's, representing Mr Paul Speak.
Good morning, Stephen Harris from Emery Planning, representing Holland Strategic Land.
Good morning, Dave Trimmingham from Turley, representing Peel Land and Property.
Christopher Young, King's Counsel, representing Peel.
Okay, thank you. Are there any general questions or queries about the proceedings? Okay, thank you. So I'll just outline, before I ask the GMCA to do a general introduction to the Greenbelt additions, what I intend to do is cover some general principles and some issues that are common to all the authorities. And then when I come on to each authority, there are some issues in common to those authorities, if that makes sense. So we'll deal with it in that way before picking up on any individual sites. And when we get to talking about the individual sites, there'll be no need to repeat any comments that you've already made on those general principles. It'll just keep the process nice and smooth, I hope. So, and just as a general point as well, there's no need to raise matters that we've already discussed in other sessions. So if we start to get into discussions about brownfield land or other things, then obviously I've heard, we have heard a lot of those points that have been made. It's just to help us get through the day in an efficient way. So I'll ask the GMCA to do an introduction, and depending on what you say in that, I intend to ask some questions on the general principles. Okay, thank you.
No problem, ma'am. I intend to cover principles, general principles, and some specific points in these opening remarks. And forgive me, this will take a few minutes. I hope not too many. So Greenbelt additions. If I can just start with national policy, please. And paragraph 140 of the NPPF, the framework, sets the same exceptional circumstances test for adding to an existing green belt as it does for release of land from an existing green belt. But otherwise, the framework doesn't help any further in relation to making additions to the green belt. Paragraphs 141 and 142 plainly concern policy in relation to releasing land from the green belt, as indeed does much of paragraph 143. Paragraph 139 of the framework is about entirely new green belts, not about adding to existing green belts. Then finally, in these references to the framework, paragraph 143 at item F for Freddie, does provide some help in relation to boundary-specific issues. That's the sub-paragraph about clear boundaries that we've referred to on many occasions already at these proceedings. Now, the PPG, National Planning Practice Guidance, doesn't help at all in relation to additions to existing green belt. However, and this is the important point, ma'am, the law adds a layer of exactitude and rigour to the process. The leading case is a Court of Appeal case called Solihull, Metropolitan Borough Council, and Gallagher. It's a case decided by the Court of Appeal 2014. It's not, I believe, in the examination library. It has been referred to in representations, particularly by Peel. It's a case close to my heart because all that I'm about to say I argued strongly against in the Court of Appeal and lost. Paragraphs 28 through to 37 are the paragraphs that you will need in due course, and it would be sensible for you and your colleagues to have the case. It draws together two previous authorities on the subject. And in essence, and this is my distillation of the legal principle, in essence, when it comes to assessing whether or not there are exceptional circumstances to add land to an existing green belt, one needs to ask oneself the question, what has changed fundamentally? What has changed fundamentally since the time when the green belt and its extent was originally or last considered? I'll explain that originally or last in a few moments' time. So what has changed fundamentally since that time when the proposed Greenbelt addition was not included in the Greenbelt, because the Greenbelt at that time did not include the land in question? Now, the reference to, on my part, to looking back to when the Greenbelt was originally or last considered is a practical point, because in the case of Greater Manchester, the extent of the Greenbelt was set in a bespoke local plan in 1984, but in some instances, not all, as you work your way around the 9 authorities that are in front of you here, in some instances, subsequent to that, after that, there were development plans that looked again at the question of the green belt, and we'll come to that if we need to, as we get to each authority. So, in other words, in asking that fundamental change, what's changed fundamentally since when this was considered previously? In asking that question, one is not looking at the issue of Greenbelt additions in the abstract, but rather in the context of what has been done before. And it's that fundamental change test which is derived from the case law, as I say, the framework and the PPG. Well, the PPG doesn't help at all when the framework simply refers to exceptional circumstances. So it's that vital context, if you like, which is set by the legal principle. I'd simply add that in some instances, and I'll come to the practical implications of this shortly, in some instances it is in my submission within the remit of national policy and the law to suggest a revised Greenbelt boundary where the existing boundary simply doesn't make sense on the ground. And in my terminology, I'm going to call those anomalous boundaries. So my distillation of the legal principles is, number one, in cases of fundamental change in circumstances, one can propose an addition to an existing green belt. And secondly, where an existing boundary is anomalous, just doesn't make sense, it is open to an authority to propose an addition to the green belt to deal with that issue. Now, the ramifications of the legal principles in particular, because the policy is simply exceptional circumstances, it's the legal principles which are particularly important. The ramifications of that for the sessions that we're about to embark on in relation to Greenbelt additions from our perspective is as follows. So in preparation for these sessions, we've tested our case with regard to each and all of the proposed Greenbelt additions, bearing in mind 2 points. First of all, our primary duty is to you, the tribunal, you and your colleagues. We're not here making a case, ignoring our duty to you. Quite the opposite, our primary duty is to you. And secondly, we're a team of professionals. And with all of that in mind, we've applied that rigorous legal test and also the anomalous boundaries point to the 49 proposed additions to the green belt. And the net result, and I'll explain this in more detail if you'll bear with me just in a few moments' time, the net result of that is that there are 17 of the 49 where we consider that there is a strong case for making the additions that are proposed to the green belt. I'll indicate which they are in a few moments' time if you'll bear with me. Just for your note, 8 of those are instances of fundamental change. 8 of those 17 are instances of fundamental change, as we see it. Obviously, we're going to have a debate about this. 8 of those are instances of fundamental change. Of those 8, 3 also are anomalous boundary cases. So of those 8, 3 are also anomalous boundary cases. And then there are 9 which are anomalous boundaries only, So 8 plus 9 is the 17. I'll indicate which they are in a few moments' time. For the other 32, we as a team do not consider that there's a strong case that surmounts the legal test. I do not have instructions to withdraw those 32 from the process. You have our matters statements for all of them, and to use language which you'll be familiar with because I've used it on several occasions during these proceedings in other contexts. I wouldn't be surprised were you to report in due course that those 32 do not meet, and it's particularly the legal test. Now, just to explain, and I think it would help, ma'am, if I indicated which of the ones that we're dealing with today fall within the category where we do intend to, and we do wish to, make our case to you. I can help you with the ones that we'll be returning to, when we come back. But of today's ones, so there are, as you know, there are 2 proposed Greenbelt additions in Bolton. They're numbers 1 and 2 in the list. The list starts at page 410 of the hard copy of Places for Everyone, where there's a helpful list. So there are 2 in Bolton, numbers 1 and 2 are their IDs, and in neither case do we consider that the exacting legal test is one that we as a team can make a case for here. In relation to Bury, there are 14 proposed Greenbelt additions. They are numbers 3 through to 16 inclusive, and 3 of those we do consider are instances of anomalous boundaries, and so we will be pressing our case for those. And they are number 5, Pigsley Brook, number 2. As if it wasn't enough to have one Pigsley Brook. Pigsley Brook, number 2. Number 12, Wolford. And number 14, Chesham. So 5, 12, and 14. We then move to, I'm doing this in the order of the timetable for today, we then move to Wigan. Their sites are set out at the page 413 of Places for Everyone. They have 6 proposed Greenbelt additions in total, numbers 44 through to 49 inclusive. And of those, 1, that's number 44, land off Fir Tree Street, Ince, is, as far as we're concerned, an anomalous boundary case. We then move to Salford, and Salford, that's 412, page 412 of the plan. They have 5 proposed Greenbelt additions, and of the 5, there are 3. They are numbers 26, 28, and 29. 26, land southeast of Slackbrook, open space. 28, part of the Logistics North Country Park. And 29, land west of Burgess Farm, where we consider there are both fundamental changes and anomalous boundaries in each of those 3 instances. And then finally, for today's purposes, Trafford, they have 1 site, 1 addition at page 413 of the plan. That's GBA 43, Greenbelt Edition 43, Midlands Farm, Moss Lane, and that is a case where we consider there is a fundamental change, so we will be pressing our case for that one for Trafford. Would it help, ma'am, if I gave you, if I did the same thing for what's to come when we come back? And I'll just remind myself of when we come back, we are dealing with Oldham, Rochdale and Tameside. So
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Ma'am. Thank you. Oldham has one green belt addition at page 411. That's number 17 in the list. Denshaw Village. We will not be pressing our case in relation to that, Oldham. Then we go to Rochdale. Rochdale have 8 in the list. They are numbers 18 through to 25. And of those, we will be pressing our case in relation to 2. That is Greenbelt Edition number 19, land to the west of Stake Hill Business Park, which we see as a fundamental change case. And we will be pressing our case for number 25, land at Summit Haywood, which we see as an anomalous boundary case. That, I think, simply leaves Tameside. Tameside have 12 in the list, numbers 31 through to 42. And of those, we will be pursuing, bear with me for one moment, please, ma'am. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We will be pursuing 7 of those, and they are as follows. Number 31, Fox Platt Mossley, and that's an anomalous boundary case as far as we're concerned. 32, Manor Farm Close, Waterloo, Ashton, anomalous boundary. 35, Woodview, Southview, Carbrook, Stallybridge, anomalous boundary. And then, ma'am, there are 3 which, although they're listed in a particular order here, really need to be considered together, and I'll indicate those to you. They are numbers 37, 40 and 41. You wouldn't know it from the map in the plan, because the map in the plan actually misses one of them out, but they run north to south, south to north. They're all co-joined, if you like. So for 37, 40 and 41, so 37 Broadbottom Road, Broadbottom, 40 Hyde Road, Mottram, 41 Ashworth Lane, Mottram, each of those are, each and all of them are fundamental change as far as we're concerned cases. So I've skipped one of the ones I want to refer to in saying that, because those 3 need to be considered together as far as we're concerned. Then still with Tameside, number 39, Cemetery Road, Denton, an anomalous boundary. And then finally, that was it actually, that was the final one, yes, finally. So ma'am, that's all of them, and I hope that assists. And that's our position. I'm very happy to obviously answer any questions and elaborate, but it is, I seek to stress, because of the exactitude of the legal test and the fundamental change principle, if you like, that the law has established and confirmed. So that's where we are, ma'am. You have our matter statements for all of them, but the ones that we consider there's a strong case that we'd particularly like you to consider are the ones I've indicated, the 17 of the 49.
I think on the basis of that, having discussed with Mr. Lee, we might need a short adjournment just to gather our thoughts for a few minutes.
Notes, of course.
If you allow us to do that, I notice the CPRE have got something to say, but I think me and my colleague need to go and just reflect for a moment to see how we might approach that. I'm sure everybody would appreciate that we probably need to do that. So yes, so if I think if we can take a break for 15 minutes.
Yep, sure.
So I need to work out what that means at 10 past, return at 10 past 10. Now, I'd appreciate then we'll need to take another break to hear from Christian Wakeford MP, but we'll still accommodate that. So we'll return at 10 past 10.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you for allowing us just to have a think about what the GMCA have raised. First of all, it would be helpful, I just want to clarify now, it would be helpful to have a copy of the Court of Appeal judgment, please.
Yes, ma'am, we're at the library. I know my learned friend has copious hard copies of them, but we're added to the examination.
Add it to the library, yes, thank you. So what I intend to do following GMCA's introduction, I think it is from our perspective helpful to allow people to comment on what was said, both in respect of the legal tests and exceptional circumstances, and also in relation to paragraph 139. I understand what the GMCA have said, but I do note that other parties here have made comments on that, so that would be helpful to us. What we'll do in relation to the Greenbelt additions in the authorities today is obviously we will discuss and ask questions on the sites that we know that the GMCA are intending to defend and still make commentary on. And in terms of other sites, now I know that there are some people here who are actually seeking to support the inclusion of Greenbelt additions, particularly in relation to Stocks Residents Association. I know they're supportive of one of the Greenbelt additions in Bolton. And I think, yes, we accept the case law so far, just in general terms, but of course, other case law may arise as well. So I think it would be helpful just to go through very briefly on each site, and hopefully it is very brief, whether there still may be a case made to justify exceptional circumstances. We accept the legal test side of things, but if the authorities wish to make a comment on that, and you may need a minute to talk about that, but...
Can I just say this, ma'am, if it helps? I mean, the law is the law, and yes, you know, who knows, it might change in the future, but the law is settled as it stands. There have been 3 cases on this, and the case law was all brought together in the principles established by the Court of Appeal and confirmed and established by the Court of Appeal in the Solihull case. So, you know, we have to work on that. Obviously, all of us have to work on that basis. But I did want to say, in any event, I mean, I've made our position as clear as I can, and I'm sure and I know that you understand why I've said what I've said. But of course, that doesn't stop any of those who were in support of a Greenbelt addition that we're no longer pressing. That doesn't stop anyone here from making their points. And I'm sure that there will be a number of people here who will want to say, well, that's all very interesting, but we think Greenbelt addition number so-and-so should be added to the Greenbelt for the following reasons. But I mean, obviously you can ask us whatever questions you wish, and we're here to, you know, our job is to assist you. But in relation to those that were not on my list of 17, I'm afraid, be saying, well, you have our matter statement, but I cannot say to you, hand on heart, this meets its acting legal test. You know, that's the point.
Okay, I think that's helpful then, because there's no point in us asking you that question for each site if you're not going to for the 37 sites. It is 32, sorry.
32, yes.
32 sites. There's no point in us asking that question. So what I'll do then is I'll see if anybody wants to say anything on individual sites that aren't related to the ones that are being defended. There's no point in us pressing you if you're not going to respond. It doesn't get us anywhere at all.
I will respond, but my response will be as I've just set out.
Just look at the matter statement, ma'am. Yes. So, yes. Okay. Thank you. So in that case, then. I think unless the GMCA want to add anything, we'll get straight on with asking those that are here to ask if they want to make any
I think sorry, I'm ever so sorry, ma'am. The schedule, we do have the schedule if it would help participants. I know that, how many do you have?
Well, I was on to, that's for the inspector, sorry. I was going to...
These are for the inspectors?
Yes.
Okay, I'll have to hand those ones up. got one spare for me. Just so I've got the same. I don't know why I'm being so fussy. Thanks. Thank you. Sorry to hold up matters.
Okay, yes, thank you. Because Mr. Lee will follow on from me, we're just agreeing that we won't ask. We'll only ask about the sites that you are still defending. We don't want to waste examination time unless there are participants here who would like to say something. I'll just wait a second until we've settled with handing out these sheets. Okay, is everybody ready to continue? Okay, thank you. In that case, then I'll take comments that relate to the general principles in terms of the legal tests and exceptional circumstances, and any comments on that parties might have on the application of the framework as well. I noticed CPRE, your nameplate did go up right before I said I needed an adjournment. So I'll start with you first, please, and thank you for bearing with us.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to ask for a list because obviously we feel rather surprised with the ambush at this point that a number of sites were going to be defended by GMCA. We only find out today. Now, I'm here with Stocks Residents Association with regards to a particular site, but CPRE hadn't put in detailed statements relating to the other sites that they're now saying they're not going to defend because we thought we didn't need to. There's a general principle of Greenbelt, why it exists and the functions it performs in keeping land permanently open. It has successfully stopped urban sprawl, stopped townships merging, stopped countryside encroachment, protected historic settlements, and it obviously contributes a lot to brownfield regeneration, which is a key principle of this, apparently. A key principle of the Place for Everyone plan. All the way through the local plan consultations, there's been a massive backlash against any greenbelt loss, and one of the changes to the spatial plan was offering greenbelt additions to, in some way, reduce the overall net harm to greenbelt, and that has been a source of comfort, and there are genuine planning reasons why each parcel ought to be added because of the functions they provide. Now, whilst I understand the GMCA may have come to a position, we probably need to unpick it all because it might be in some cases it's to do with housing delivery, but as far as CPRE is concerned, this submission local plan was submitted to be found sound on the basis that, as a whole, all of the parcels contribute and balance out the losses elsewhere. So you can't really look at the planning issues relating to each site are important, but it's also the overall overarching principles. Greenbelt maintains openness in a visual and spatial sense, and there are a lot of public goods in terms of recreation, health, wildlife. So I'm really shocked. I think it's really poor that, you know, we could have heard about this on the 1st of November, on the start in January, to find about it now. It's really difficult because I'm not in a position to be able to speak out about the Bury sites, Rochdale, Salford, Tameside, or Trafford or Wigan. I am prepared for Bolton, and there's an amazing case. Absolutely, that site ought to be maintained in the Greenbelt. And I can't say, because I don't know the details of the other, I don't know. I can articulate on some of the principles, but not on all of them. Thank you.
And I appreciate that. I mean, in the past, where there have been issues that have been raised where we think we need input from parties, then we have asked for statements to be submitted. I'm not saying that this is something that we would do now, but we need to go away and think, after having had this discussion, what the implications of this are. So, and I note what you say about not having prepared cases for those other sites. We will come on to Bolton, because obviously I'm aware that you and Stocks Residents Association have commented on that site in particular. Are there any other comments from other parties in relation to the principles? And Peel, you have your nameplate up.
So just very briefly, we completely endorse what the council have said, and just, if I may, as another barrister, just explain that obviously the point that Mr. Kitkowski was making is a fundamental point for us professionally, which is that you should not, the Court of Appeal have said, you should not be arguing cases that are not capable of being argued. And as a consequence of which, you know, the reference to the professionalism, not just of Malone Friend, but of his team, is a reference to not spending the time arguing something that should not be argued. The case law is absolutely clear. Your reference to it changing, well, it only changes when it changes, and these are Court of Appeal judgments. These are judgments that go well above the High Court, and Court of Appeal judgments are binding both on the High Court and on the court itself. So, as a consequence of which, unless something ended up in the Supreme Court, this is the law, and we obviously have made our representations in relation to this and applied that in terms of the fundamental change test, and it's very clear that the decision that has been made in relation to those sites is completely and utterly consistent with the law. So there really shouldn't be any doubt about that. I'll just indicate as well, we too are capable of reflecting on our case, and we will make clear now that we will not be seeking to fight against the extension of the Greenbelt in respect of Burgess Farm. There is a fundamental change there. Number 29, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that confirmation. I see some other nameplates have gone up. Sorry, I didn't see whose was first, but I'll start with Alan Shepherd first, please.
Good morning, Alan Shepherd, a resident of Radcliffe. I agree with everything that the lady further down on this side said in her introduction. But having been involved in this for 5 or 6 years, I can remember that it was the backlash of the amount of Greenbelt and the quality of Greenbelt that was being removed that caused the GMCA to offer up the additional pieces of Greenbelt. I wouldn't say any of them in Bury gave us a sense of satisfaction or good feeling, as she may have referred to. But having said that, we now surely have to revert back to the initial status quo, and that the public, the community, are saying that you're taking away too much Greenbelt. So the Greenbelt either should be replaced with quality and comparable Greenbelt, or should not be taken away at all.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Birchmore.
Yeah, some of the residents, in terms of investigation of environmental impacts and things, because these sites have been additions, they've not concentrated on those, they've concentrated on the sites that are going to be removed. Maybe if they'd have known that they were intending on now not fighting them, maybe there would have been other information that would have come forward. As I say, people have assumed, because these are going to be added, that these sites have been ignored completely.
Okay, when you say what other information do you think might have been included? I know you're thinking on the hoof like others here, so if you can give me an example of something that might be relevant.
Well, for example, in terms of environmental impacts, I know people have put in reports. We have had written reports by individuals in our area about impact on various Greenbelt sites that have been removed. But he didn't put anything forward about these sites because he assumed that these sites were going to actually be included. So it's just, you might, you know, he did ask, would it be possible to send in further information relating to environmental impact?
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Harris, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm a bit taken aback that we've suddenly been announced that a number of sites have been removed. I'm talking about Bury now. But the fact still remains that the Pigsley Brook, the Wolfold and the Chesham, basically we've got to establish very special or exceptional circumstances on these sites. The bar is very high. It's every bit as high as when one is removing, as has been recommended here. The bar is still very high. So for these sites to have this status, first of all, there's lots of criteria. I'm actually looking at the maps.
We will, where those sites are being defended, we'll come on to talk to those individually
about Bury.
soon. So
yes, my comment is still the same, that we've suddenly been presented with this change of agenda, which obviously we'll address later. Thank you.
Okay, any points that the GMCA want to respond to there?
Just one point. It's a reference by Councillor Birchmore to potential environmental impacts on the proposed Greenbelt additions in the submitted plan, that we are not pressing our case in relation to. And just to clarify, obviously we'll await your report, but let's just assume, for the sake of my point, that where we're not pressing our case for a Greenbelt addition, in due course you report back to us that you do not consider that the Greenbelt addition should be made. And let's just assume that. Let's just assume that for the sake of my point. That doesn't mean, and it's just important to clarify this, it doesn't mean that any such areas of land are switched to being development sites. They're just left in whatever their current state is by way of any planning policy protections, depending upon which authority's area are in. There will or there won't be, depending on which site it is and which authority it is, there will or there won't be some form of designation which will apply. It just won't be Greenbelt. So environmental impact, just in case there was a thought that if a site isn't added to the Greenbelt, it then is a development site. That's not what Places for Everyone would do in relation to any such areas of land where we're no longer pressing our case for a Greenbelt addition. And it's no part of the purposes of the Greenbelt to deal with environmental matters. The Greenbelt is a spatial designation. It is not an environmental designation. And we know that its 5 purposes are unrestricted sprawl, checking that, preventing towns from merging, safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, preserving the setting, etc., of historic towns, assisting in urban regeneration. So it isn't a purpose of the Greenbelt to, for example, deal with environmental matters. It's a spatial designation. So obviously you in due course will advise us and decide whether there should be an opportunity for any further statements to be submitted in writing for you and your colleagues to consider that. I'm entirely neutral on that. I mean, whatever you decide is absolutely fine from our perspective, of course. But I just wanted to clarify that environmental impact isn't really the point in relation to Greenbelt additions. We had never made a case for any of these Greenbelt additions on the basis of environmental points. So I just want to stress that.
Okay, thank you. I do still see a couple of nameplates up. CPRE. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to just pick up on the planning law and professionalism. Clearly, planning law changes all the time as a result by case decisions, and there's a degree of planning judgment which is also a good and true profession. We are here to support you as an examination panel come to a view, and if I use the Horwich golf course site as an example, I would think that there's actually more good planning logic for that site to become a Greenbelt addition. Now, in total, the list of sites add up to 156 hectares, and I would assume each of those sites would need to go through some planning rigour to ensure that decisions that are being made about the future of those sites are done so in good faith. Agreed, environmental issues are not a function of Greenbelt, but it so happens when you overlay a map of Greenbelt and the sites that are particularly important from an environmental point of view, there's a large degree of correlation. So the government is interested in public goods and how Greenbelt can serve more public goods, and I think that is an important part in terms of material considerations, whether some sites should be included into the Greenbelt or not. I accept where we are in terms of legal judgments and the case of Solihull, but, you know, I think it's only right, given the very long nature of a local plan, that all these issues are thoroughly considered. Because the public have keenly observed this process. It's astounding that 27,000 people wrote in to an early consultation. 93% of those objected to Greenbelt loss. It's a massive local public opinion in terms of the value that's held on Greenbelt, and that just needs to be respected in the planning process. Thank you.
Thank you. It is 10:30. Well, just gone. I'm not sure whether we're still expecting Mr. Wakeford to appear, but did GMCA, did you want to respond to any points?
Just very
made?
briefly, while we're seeing whether the MP is with us, so to speak. Just to respond to one or two of the points that have just been made. I've explained the position, and there's no escaping the case law. As I've said previously, a very famous and distinguished judge called Lord Denning said once, "Be you ever so high, the law is above you." We're bound by the law, and in relation to a planning judgment, well, the judgment call is set by the law, and the judgment call is, has there been a fundamental change of circumstances, as I explained earlier on. So, and it's in relation to applying that test that I've said what I've said. So I'll leave it there, ma'am. I don't know whether the MP is around or not.
I think, well, we'll carry on with the business, I think, and then if he comes on screen, then we'll pause at that point, if that's okay. I don't want to delay the proceedings. So then what I intend to do now, as we've said, is look at sites where, excuse me, there are still being, well, I think it would be helpful as the CPR in the Stocks Residents Association are here. I think it would be helpful to go through their concerns about the Bolton site first.
Well, definitely. No, I mean, I would have thought, ma'am, that in relation to Bolton, you have our position, but of course, for those who wish to argue in favour of the Greenbelt additions, then they certainly should do so, of course.
I mean, on that basis, from the CPRE and Stocks Residents Association, I'm aware of the comments you made. I suppose the way in which you're framing them might have changed a little bit, but I think it would still be helpful to hear from you why you think that site in particular should still be included. I'm happy to hear from that, obviously, given the comments that you've made. So I'm not asking you to change the way that you might have presented what your concerns are.
Okay, CPRE considers this parcel of land to have a strong reason to be part of the green belt of Greater Manchester moving forward. It would actually rationalise a piece of land that is currently in Oppel, which is other protected open land. The site has a long history, which I'll pass over to colleagues to talk about in due course. But the key issue relates to 3 appeals that were heard recently by 2 planning inspectors. The southern part of the site was recently approved for 276 and 150 homes. And as part of the detailed planning decision making, it was agreed that the site would be laid out with a boundary treatment between the roads of Mayfair and Buckingham Avenue. And the reason for the location of that was 2 of the planning inspectors agreed that at that particular point of the site, there's a change in gradient. It almost acts like a visual and spatial ridge. So a dry stone wall is going to exist along that line. Above the line, to the northwest, it's open moorland fringe. It's a buffer land of pasture leading up to a historic conservation area. And for very good planning reasons, that site was kept out of the developable envelope of the site, and it was supposed to be a recreation area with orchards and other public goods. Stocks Residents Association made a case as the Rule 6 party against the southern part of the golf course being included, and one of the reasons was to do with health impacts, because the housing to the south and the east has very poor socio-economic indicators. It performs very poorly, and there was concern that as the site existed as a golf course, people used to walk on the public rights-of-way around the boundary and through the site to the top, dog walking, and it gave immediate access to a pleasant green space. The concern is Oppel wasn't a sufficiently strong enough designation to stop the site from previously coming forward, and there's a concern that if this site isn't put into the green belt, it will leave a indefensible boundary, and that it would lead to future development pressure due to the landowning. So I think that's all I need to say at this juncture, but there are clear reasons for strengthening the green belt in that particular location. As I say, a clear ridge, it would be a clear boundary, it would be defined by a dry stone wall, and it would be a permanent boundary. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Stocks Residents Association.
Thank you, ma'am. Just getting my head back into order after. I'm Malcolm Harrison. I'm the chair. I am a chartered surveyor, by the way, but not directly involved in planning. We're just really getting our heads back into it. 40 minutes after pursuing this site for about 6.5 years, we've got a fair degree of local knowledge. We've been well supported by the people of Horwich. In fact, I think we were the voice of Horwich for most of this. But the reason we think this land should be granted Greenbelt status is quite clear. Now the development has been proposed, we've now got a clearly defined line for what is a historic town, Horwich. It goes back a number of centuries. It clearly is a buffer between that and the Pennines. And what we're concerned about, as it's only Opal status, is that these Pennine fringes will be eaten up in due course and basically absorb the local conservation area in due course, and its differentiation from the area called the Bottomouth Moor, which is going up there. So it meets that clear principle of stopping urban sprawl. It has a clear defined boundary. And the first appeal, which was proposing to put development into this area, was rejected by Inspector Felgate. And if you look at his observations in his report at paragraphs 17 to 21, he clearly defines why this area of land is different. And therefore, we feel that this, if we are to stop urban sprawl, it will continue in that otherwise, because Opal isn't a strong enough defence to it. Now, I know Peel here, they made the application, and we've locked horns over 3 inquiries, and they were successful. It's interesting that they put the site up for sale, part of it, that actually extends into this area. advocating available for residential development, about 7.5 hectares. I've only just discovered that we know that it's up for sale. We only discovered this morning that Peel have put it up for sale. So we feel that from the point of view of Horwich and its residents, I mean, we only have 55 official members of the Residents Association. We have over 300 people on our mailing list, and we disseminate it out there. And the people of Horwich, in small donations, have supported to try and protect this land, which allowed us to instruct council and consultants to try and to defend this land. So it has real importance to this area. We're not just a NIMBY organisation. This is OPOL, this is green belt, green space disappearing. I don't think there's been many objections to the local works where there's 1,700 houses going on, which is Brownfield, or the one which is the old de Havilland site, I think it's called Hazel Fold now, where another 200 houses have gone on there. There's been no major objections, but the last two major applications in Horwich, lost the golf course, that was OPOL, and one that was called Llama Fields, and I can't remember what it's called, I think it's something green, it's now as a development site, was OPOL as well. We can see the trend, we can see the expansion of the town going forward when there are more than enough development sites going forward in Horwich. So I think it really does fit the requirement of Greenbelt in that it is defining the boundary of a historic town, and it is that open space that fits into the Greenbelt and to the Pennine area. I don't think there's much else. John, do you want to say something?
Thank you, Ma'am. Just very briefly to say that I think when the planning consultants have previously looked at this area of land, and I believe a report from Turley was put forward probably a decade ago, it drew, as I recall, a very similar line to that which was suggested by Inspector Felgate and obviously not contested by the other inspector who looked after the conjoined inquiry. We have not, as an association, submitted that report from Turley, not considering it to be, in fact, relevant, but I dare say it could be sourced. So just to say that there has been, as far as we are aware, consensus on the existence of an effective barrier on the southern edge of the site. Thank you, Ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And I do appreciate that you've had to think on your feet with that. But thank you anyway for making that. CPRE, any final comments?
Yeah, it was just a final point because OPOL combines with other policy criteria relating to environmental impacts and others. I can't remember off the top of my head. There's clearly a limit to, in my view, a clear limit, and as has been asserted by the previous inspectors. And if you were to go and visit the site, I think you would benefit from understanding the line of where development is and why it would be a sensible green boundary. And it would perform all 5 functions incredibly well, not just one. So in particular, it is a very good site, but yeah, so OPOL is not a backstop policy position. Anything else? No, I think that's it. As I say, and in terms of, I mentioned recreational activities, obviously now there's a lot less available land for people to walk on public rights of way and exercise dogs and picnic and things. And it's, on the 2 site visits I've done there, the top of the site was always very well used. It was a sunny day, so there were actually people out there with families, kids, pushchairs, enjoying that site. So I think don't underestimate the value of that green space.
Okay, thank you. I won't ask GMCA to comment. I'm sure you appreciate that's their position, that they won't be making any comments on the sites. But thank you for your contributions anyway. I think we'll move on now to the Bury site. And
Can I just, before you do that, ma'am, sorry, I've been asked to say the Member of Parliament has had trouble joining the proceedings, but your programme officers have resent the link to the MP, so
okay.
you may see him popping up any moment.
Okay, thank you. I think with the Bury site, what it might be useful to do before we go on to, I think the 3 that there are, is just see. Right. Well, no, we'll hear from. Good morning, Mr. Wakeford. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry you've had some issues.
Not a problem. I've now caught my breath back from running from the chamber as well. Thank you for having me. Is there any particular format to go into, or?
I think is my understanding correct? You wish to make a statement, don't you, about both the relating to the Bury sites, the site allocations? Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I mean, obviously, we have had the discussions about the site allocations. So unfortunately, there won't be any comments following that. But I'm quite happy for you to make your statement, and then you can either leave or sit in and listen to the discussions as we go through. We're dealing with Greenbelt additions today.
It's greatly appreciated. In that case, I'll crack on and then listen in for a bit.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as you said, Chairman, I'd like to focus specifically on the sites at Simister and for Elton Reservoir, both within my constituency, relating in particular to the Greenbelt allocations. When I'm talking about Greenbelt, I'm thinking predominantly from the NPPF section 13 in regards to why the Greenbelt was originally designed and its focus on being maintained. What we've seen in recent months has also been a government change in priority in regards to try to maintain and protect the Greenbelt, whilst also looking at housing numbers, which, whilst I'm aware that's a future policy that's not been implemented yet and is open to consultation, I do believe it is something that should also be considered. What I'd like to focus on predominantly is certain paragraphs within the NPPF, in particular paragraphs 137. Obviously, the government attaching great importance to the Greenbelt, and it's a fundamental aim of the Greenbelt to prevent urban sprawl. When I look predominantly at the site of Elton Reservoir, located between Radcliffe and the town of Bury, I cannot see how this policy can be maintained and urban sprawl prevented by allowing this site to be built over. It's literally the only green site between the two towns, and it would literally join the two irreversibly. So I think it's something we certainly do need to protect and maintain. Likewise, in paragraph 138, where we've got the 5 purposes, which is to protect urban sprawl, to prevent neighbouring towns merging into one another, to assist safeguarding the countryside, to set aside a special character of historic towns, and to assist in urban regeneration. I think 4 of these are certainly being breached with the proposal at Elton Reservoir, in that it clearly will not prevent unrestricted sprawl. It will merge 2 towns together. It is a complete antithesis to safeguarding the countryside and encroachment, and it certainly will not preserve the special characteristic of historic towns like Radcliffe or Bury. When we move on to paragraph 140 and 147, in terms of the exceptional circumstances allowance in terms of Greenbelt through all the planning process of the Places for Everyone programme, GMSF, before it was changed, and the associated consultations, at no point have I ever seen a particular circumstance that can be explained as to why it's exceptional, why it's needed. And whilst there's many talks and links into the strategic benefits of building on either this site or the Simister site, I still do not believe that the very special circumstances or exceptional circumstances have been met. I certainly do not believe, in regards to paragraph 141, that the that all other avenues have been reasonably explored, especially as some of these housing numbers have come down. There's been a greater use of brownfield sites during the process. So I do think, certainly with the change in direction from the government, that we do certainly need to reconsider the allocations of sites and to put a greater focus and emphasis on where we are going. Again, I think we are looking at the town of Simister essentially doubling in size, whilst it's a very niche, quiet little village, hamlet, if you will. I cannot see how building the best part of 2,000 houses around a village that doesn't have 2,000 houses in its entirety can be anything close to maintaining what is a very picturesque area. It is almost going to engulf an entire village and change its entire characteristic. So I do think we do need to protect, enhance and maintain our green environments, as we've all seen during the COVID pandemic, that we all do cherish them. We all do try to maintain them where we can. So whilst I'm trying to stick to the actual planning policies, as I've highlighted through section 13 of the NPPF, I do think it's not in keeping with the local area. It is infringing on historic towns, villages and areas. It's not in keeping with the built environment, the green environment. It's not protecting flora or fauna or particular safe species. And I would say picturesque areas such as Elton Reservoir, which I myself would take my daughter for many walks in. I don't see any way in how the policies can be maintained whilst we look at keeping these site allocations. So I would certainly urge the Inspectorate to look at these sites again, to reconsider the proposals that have been put in front of them, especially with the view of the consultation that's currently ongoing, because whilst there are transition arrangements that are due to be coming forward in the near future, as has been highlighted by the new Minister Rachel Maclean, I do think we do need to essentially press the pause button, see what those look like, factor that into the housing allocations, the housing numbers, and come out with a strategy that will not only maintain and protect the green belt, but will also provide the housing sites that we need for the future. So I would urge the Inspector to factor all those elements in whilst trying to maintain the green environment around our towns to ultimately prevent urban sprawl. At that, I'm very conscious that I'm already very late for this meeting, so I'll leave it at that moment and listen to some of the rest of the session.
Okay, that's fine. You can either keep your camera on or turn it off. If you wish to say anything at any point, just put yourself on mute, obviously. If you wish to say anything at the point in the proceedings, we are actually just about to start discussing Greenbelt additions in Bury, so that is probably going to be of interest to you, and it doesn't matter if you're late, that's fine. I appreciate there were technical difficulties. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. So we will now come on to the Bury site, and what I'd like to do is actually start with any comments from anybody on the sites that we're not going to be discussing in detail. So any of the Greenbelt additions, we're only going to be focusing on the 3 that Bury are defending, so that's GBA 5, 12 and 14. If you have any comments on any of the others, then I will take those now. Similar to how Stocks Residents Association made comments on the Bolton one. Does anybody have any points? Otherwise, we'll... Councillor Harris.
Yeah. Yes, so my comments are on the 3 sites.
That's fine.
Yes, it's just unfortunate that the MP has obviously not read the agenda, because he's discussing what we'd already discussed several months before. But anyway, forgive me, I have a sore throat.
That's fine. I think there were reasons that Mr Wakeford couldn't actually attend earlier sessions, so I did say I was quite happy to hear his statement.
It's just that you didn't want us to discuss... right, anyway.
I
yes.
appreciate that, yes.
Thank you, Madam
But
Chair.
you've had
Yes,
your opportunity as well.
Right, so we are thinking on our feet, which is probably quite useful, actually, because we're talking about 3 sites, and in fact, the 3 particular sites...
Right. Sorry, if you want to talk about the 3 particular sites, I do have questions for the GMCA on those to start with. So
Right.
I'll do those, and then I'll let you... Sorry, I keep stopping you, but I would like you to comment once I've asked my questions, and I'll let you know when that is.
So, sorry, you want me to speak on the sites or not, or you want me to...
I do, yes, but not yet. I've got some questions for the GMCA on them first. Thank you. Sorry about that. It's a little bit unclear because obviously we're working to a slightly different agenda than we were earlier.
Just to be clear, ma'am, as I understand it, what you were saying just now is that there are 3 sites in Bury, 3 Greenbelt additions where we, the GMC, are pressing our case. That's numbers 5, 12 and 14. You're going to ask us some questions about those, and then you'll open up discussion. But you were asking whether anyone in the room wanted to say anything concerning the other Greenbelt additions in Bury. So that's numbers 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13 and 15 that are not in that short list of 3 that we are pressing our case. So that was it. Whether it, any of those representatives who are here with interest in Bury, whether they wanted to say anything about those other Greenbelt additions, not other than the 3 that you're going to ask us some questions about, which are numbers 5, 12 and 14.
That's right. Yes, thank you. And I notice you've for Paul Speak, I think it was 07 New Road Radcliffe that your interest was in. Did you want to make any comments?
That's correct, Ma'am. Just a very brief comment in light of the GMCA's position on this matter. We obviously agree with that position, and just to let you know, by way of an update, that we are actively pursuing a planning application at the site. That's in and live, and we have an agreed position with the council on the principle of residential development on that land. So we believe it's a sustainable and accessible site that we are looking to actively bring forward. So I won't labour any of the Greenbelt points that you have in our written representations. You have those before you already. So I don't know if my colleague has any comments.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a local resident. I've lived in Radcliffe since primary school age, so I'm quite familiar with the area. Now, this particular site, although it seems it's been taken out now, I just wanted to make clear that such sites like this are just general wasteland, and they just do not compare to the Greenbelt at Elton Reservoir. So as a local girl, and I have children now, I would take my children for an ice cream around Elton Reservoir, but I wouldn't take her to any of these little pieces of wasteland that have just been thrown in all of a sudden. Also regarding the site at Elton Reservoir, there is a Signet Hotel there. Now, my friend used to work there. It's for...
Sorry, which site are you talking about? The Greenbelt addition or the Elton Reservoir?
The Elton Reservoir
allocation. We've had discussions about that. Those were, I can't remember where, a long time ago. If you're talking about the Greenbelt addition, which I think is GBA 16,
yeah,
then that's fine. But if you're talking about the site allocation proposal at Elton Reservoir, which is JPA 7,
it's GBA 7. It's just in comparison to that site, really, that it wouldn't be a similar type of area that we would use for recreation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get the point that you've made on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that resulted in a couple of other... I'll hear what you have to say. Obviously, I'm sure you appreciate you were involved. You were at the sessions relating to Bury. I'm sure you feel like hopefully you feel like you had a good say over that. So Councillor Harris first, and then Councillor Birchmore.
Yes, thank you. Yes, well, we've got 3 sites here that you have you're requesting that they are given Greenbelt status.
Yeah, sorry. I'm really sorry, we're still not there yet. I haven't asked my questions. I do apologise. I know that you're keen to speak. Just bear with me, please, Councillor Harris. And Councillor Birchmore, are your points relate to other sites, do they?
Yeah, GBA 07. yeah, I kind of agree with everything they've said, to be honest. It's not an ideal site for Greenbelt. It is opposite a derelict mill, which we have had a lot of problems. Being the councillor for that area, we have had a lot of problems with this derelict mill, and police raids and all sorts. So, the GBA 16 is behind the Signet Hospital. It does have a giant pylon going right through the middle of it, and it is next door to an industrial area. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that's any compensation for losing Greenbelt elsewhere. That's all I needed to say.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we will move on to the 3 sites. But I just need to prepare myself a little bit, because obviously I do have a question. I mean, on this, have GMCA, have you prepared a little introduction to each of these 3 sites?
Yeah, I can deal with it yes.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it's an introduction and the whole shooting match, because it's, I mean, the point is about a minute or 2 at the most for each of them, because it's a very straightforward point, ma'am. So shall I?
I think it's helpful.
Do that, and
yes.
then obviously I have an officer from the council here if you need any detailed assistance, but which you may well do, obviously. So just taking the 3 one by one. So the first is GB Greenbelt edition number 5, Pigsley Brook number 2, and that appears in the plan, places for everyone, that is, at page 418 is where you find the map showing the proposed Greenbelt addition. And this is a very straightforward point. You'll remember this is, well, you've got the sheet now, this is an anomalous boundary case as we see it. And it's a very short point. The existing Greenbelt boundary cuts across an open field. There are no features readily recognisable or otherwise on the ground to define the boundary, to show where it is. I mean, you wouldn't know as you walked a few paces east or west whether you were, you know, in a different area, if you like, the one side of the non-existent line to the other side of the non-existent line. So it's very, very straightforward, this. There isn't really a boundary at all. And we seek to, by adding land to the Greenbelt in this location, to ensure the Greenbelt does have strong boundaries to all sides. Ma'am, obviously I don't know off the top of my head whether you've yet been on a tour of these Greenbelt additions, but it's clear on the ground, A, that there's nothing there at the moment in relation to the existing Greenbelt, and B, that there would be if the proposed addition went through and was adopted. So that's the anomalous boundary for number 5. There's going to be a theme for these ones in Bury, ma'am. Your number 12, Greenbelt edition 12, which is at Woolford, and that is in the plan at page 425. And similarly here, the existing Greenbelt boundary simply cuts across an area of open land and treed land with trees on it, and there is nothing on the ground to define the boundary at all. And we propose, by the addition of land to the Greenbelt, to ensure that the Greenbelt in this area does have clearly defined boundaries. It's as simple as that. And finally, of the third of the 3, which is Greenbelt edition 14 at Chesham. Forgive me if I'm, as a southerner, not correctly pronouncing these place names, but come down to my part of the world and try and pronounce Lewes, spelled L-E-W-E-S, and you'll get all sorts of different pronunciations. So here, the Greenbelt boundary along the existing Greenbelt boundary along the north of the existing you can see it on the map on page 427, the Greenbelt boundary, which is currently shown here on the northern part of the addition there. that boundary there doesn't follow any clearly defined physical features readily recognisable or otherwise on the ground. And in similar vein as the other two, by adding land to the green belt here, we would end up in a situation where we resolve that anomalous boundary or anomalous lack of a boundary and ensure that the green belt here does have strong boundaries. So it's the same point for all three of them, obviously on the ground. You're looking at different fields or areas with trees in, but in each case, nothing that would tell you on the ground, well, here is the boundary of anything, let alone the green belt. So it's as short as that, ma'am. It's as short and simple as that.
Thank you. And earlier on, when you were doing your introduction to the Greenbelt edition, you referred to how there'd been some consideration through some development plans.
Sure.
I just wondered what the situation was in Bury. Obviously, the Greenbelt has been around for some time.
Indeed, and obviously I'll ask for confirmation of this to my left, but in a few moments' time. But yes, the Greenbelt was originally set in that local plan that I referred to earlier on in 1984. Must get the year right, in 1984. So a considerable period of time ago. In relation to the boundaries, I mean, to be quite frank, to be honest, heavens only knows how we've ended up, and the planning system has ended up in this situation where a greenbelt boundary has been drawn in these three instances with absolutely nothing at all to tell you where the boundary is. It really does look most peculiar, I have to say. And although the extent of the greenbelt obviously has been considered in, well, certainly in 1984 and in some instances after that as well, but in terms of boundaries, there's nothing that I'm aware of to assist us, or to assist you, forgive me, as to why it was that at original times that I can't believe there was a conscious decision made, to be quite frank, to draw a boundary through the middle of a field with nothing at all there to define it, or through the middle of some trees with nothing to tell you that this tree's in the green belt and that tree isn't. They just seem to be three odd, in my language, anomalous situations, but nothing that I'm aware of on the record, so to speak, will help you as to, there having been a conscious decision made that we're going to take a green belt boundary and draw it in a place that makes no sense at all. I mean, obviously the advice and the guidance and the policy about having strong boundaries, et cetera, and defining boundaries clearly has been around for a long time. It's not new with the 2012 framework, for example. But I looked to my left as to, was the green belt looked at again after 1984 in Bury?
It was. There were a series of sort of local plans that was produced in various areas across Bury, none of which were affected. None of these sites that we're talking about today were affected by any of those. They were in the late 80s. The local plans, and then subsequent to that, it was obviously looked at again through the Bury Unitary Development Plan, which is our existing statutory development plan at the moment, which was adopted in '97.
Okay, but the anomalies weren't picked up at that stage. So have these come about in the process of looking at potential greenbelt additions?
Yeah.
Simply like in that way?
Yeah.
Have, ma'am, and where we, as part of these proceedings today, and when we come back in a couple of weeks' time, where we say, we consider this an anomalous boundary, we have, I was going to say double checked, we've done more than double checked, we've checked to make sure that the position is as we're setting it out to you. But yes, as a result of this Places for Everyone process, we have come across a number of instances. I listed them earlier on. I can't remember now. Was it 9 or so? Forgive me for one moment. We have 9 anomalous boundaries, and then there are 3 in Salford which have got fundamental change as far as we're concerned, and anomalous boundaries. So we found 12 instances across 9 of the 10 authorities, so virtually all of Greater Manchester, where there are some weird boundaries, or, to be honest, non-boundaries.
And in terms of the purposes of the green belts, I take it that obviously we've got your statement with and evidence with what it says that these sites also meet green belt purposes as well.
Yes, we've documented that in our. Here it is. That's right. Oh, lovely. Yes, great. Even better. We've got a nice coloured chart. So yes, for each of the 3 additions that I've just referred to, our study work has rated the contribution of each of those, and there are, in relation to Pigsley Brook number 2, so the first of the 3, we have moderate in relation to 3 of the greenbelt purposes. In relation to Wolford, we have strong for 1 of the purposes, moderate for 2 of them, and weak for the other 2. And then for Chesham, seems to be the best of the 3, we have strong, strong, strong for 3 purposes. So that's all documented in our, thank you, that's all documented in our matters statement, as you know, ma'am, and indeed in the study work, which you have available to you, which you might even have as one of your documents for today. So yes, that's the position, ma'am. So it's but we are, the point about contributing to the green belt purposes, just to be crystal clear, that is a point of principle, if you like, and were it not for the anomalous boundaries, I don't suppose I'll be sitting here pressing these 3 on you, because this is not an exercise that one does in a vacuum. We're not sort of setting a green belt for the first time in this area. That's where the case law clicks in to see, well, what's fundamentally changed. And so, you know, a piece of land might very well be said to meet green belt purposes now, but you'd ask yourself a question, well, couldn't that point have been equally so several years ago? So that's where the law comes into play. So this is why these 3, I'm leading the case, if you like, in relation to the 3 on the anomalous boundary point. It does happen to be the case that for each of the 3, yes, they would contribute to greenbelt purposes variously, as I've just summarised, but it's the non-existent boundary which is driving the 3.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions. Councillor Harris, you'll be very pleased to know that it's your moment to shine. Please make the best of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies for any confusions before. I think I've got a bit of a cold. I'm slightly blocked up. Anyway, yes, just looking at the 3 sites, I mean, I have to say that I am very much in favour of green belt being protected. When we're talking about new protections for green belt, and I know that the bar is very high, and I have to make the comment that I do not think any of the 3 actually reach that level. Obviously, that is an opinion. Now, for instance, the Pigsley Brook one, which I'm actually looking at on the map here because I have very good maps here. First of all, there's no separation between towns. That is one of the most important criteria of green belt. It's actually not a belt as such. I'm just looking at the report from GMCA that it actually says the site comprises of woodland and is currently undevelopable due to dense tree cover. So really, to add it to the green belt does not, A, act in the spirit of the green belt at all, and serves no purpose in using it as recreation land, open land, as we're talking about. And I'm just looking at the map here. There is no separation between the 2 areas, so it doesn't fill that criteria. When we look at the Wolfold site, just bear with me a moment. Wolfold here. This particular site, originally the inspector ruled that there were no exceptional circumstances. I can't see how it's changed because exceptional circumstances is something that has to be proven for green belt status to be awarded. Now, again, if we look at the Chesham site, similar sort of thing here. There were no exceptional circumstances. That's what a previous inspector has ruled on this. So I can't see how that things have changed to allow this, because basically the sites are already protected. I think that's a very important thing to stress. They are already protected under various policies. First of all, I mentioned the first one doesn't cause a separation, which is what has to be the criteria of a green belt, separating two towns. It's mostly wooded river banks, which again has not a lot of significance as far as greenbelt status is concerned. Also, they are actually too small to have a strategic impact on preventing urban sprawl, which is the whole purpose of greenbelt land. Also, subject to flood risks, and they have poor accessibility, and some of them are already designated for recreational use. I mean, I stress that I'm in favour of green belt, having green belt, because I've spoken very firmly about the importance of green belt, probably mirrored what a lot of our MP from Bury South has just said. However, basically, we are losing in Bury a very large amount. Actually, it was 597 hectares of open space for recreation, for health, for well-being, and also for ecological reasons. Now, we are going to be, if this is agreed by you, obviously it's your decision, then you are slightly reducing that amount of greenbelt loss, but it's still very considerable. It's still in the region of 500 hectares. Now, this is so important, and I just cannot see, with all due respect, obviously you as inspectors were making this decision, but to me, trying to mitigate this loss, which appears to be the reason, the rationale behind this, it shows to me, obviously this is your decision, that the plan really is not sound, does not meet the legal test, and is unsound. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just briefly, you referred to previous inspectors on both the Wolfold and the Chesham site. Which previous inspectors is that relating to? Sorry, I've turned myself, muted myself then. Was that in relation to the local plan or appeals?
Sorry, the UDP.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to make any point on those three sites? No. Okay, thank you. Did the GMCA, did you want to come back on any of them?
Well, ma'am, we're confused about the reference to UDP inspector. Certainly, as we understand, there wasn't a consideration by your colleague dealing with the UDP as to whether either of the two areas of land should be added to the green belt. There might not have been consideration about whether the site should be allocated for development. I don't know off the top of my head, but anyway, you have our case, ma'am. It's led by the anomalous boundaries or non-existent boundaries in the three instances. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So no further questions coming from that. So then it's the Wigan sites.
Thank you, ma'am. This is my favourite.
Actually, I'm just wondering, because it is nearly 20 past 11. I think we probably need a break. So we'll take a break and return at 25 to. Oh, it's unusual seeing myself on the screen. Then it's quite weird. Yeah. So if we return at 25 to. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you, and we'll resume with the Greenbelt additions for Wigan. So here there's just one site.
Just the one, number 44. And yes, as I mentioned just before the break, this is my favourite one because well, you can see it really on the plan, which is in the Places for Everyone at page 457. I mean, this is an ominous boundary, if ever there was one, because the boundary goes through a pond. One wet foot would be in the green belt and one wet foot wouldn't be. And not only that, it does some sort of strange kink as well for some reason, but, well, for no reason that we're aware of. Anyway, it's very, very odd, ma'am, so it's an anomalous boundary, and we just seek to bring in the rest of the parcel, so to speak, into the green belt to make a strong boundary. And that's the way in which we put our case. You have our assessment about the extent to which it would meet greenbelt purposes, etc.
Thank you. And the question I would have had with this, and that there were a couple of others actually. The site size is 0.8 hectares, so it's a fairly small site. I mean, they vary in size, don't they?
Indeed.
So it was just whether that was a positive or a negative on its side. But I know what you're saying about the boundary in your case, but. It's a question I had prepared, so I wanted to ask it anyway.
And it's a, and you know, I'm on a roll from yesterday, aren't I? It's an exceptionally good question, ma'am, because it doesn't fall to me to say what a daft question. No, ma'am, it's a perfectly good question. Were we making that? Were we not making a point about the boundary? Were we making a point about, you know, fundamental change of circumstances, etc., and, you know, looking to see the extent to which it makes much of a difference really to the greenbelt purposes, this 0.8 of a hectare, then, you know, that would have been I suspect it's a point which could have been played both ways, you know, one way as in, well, really, is this really going to make any real difference to the greenbelt by adding this little bit of land? On the other, it could have been played the other way, well, it's not really going to make that much difference in terms of any negatives either. So, but we're not making our case on that basis, as I've sought to emphasise. It's simply the boundaries. I mean, this is the oddity of all oddities, I think, of the existing greenbelt boundaries. So that's where we are with it, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Well, that concludes my part of the morning. We are switching. Yes, I mean, I'm assuming, judging by the change in faces, that you've already swapped over to accommodate that. And I'm pleased to see the CPRE have stayed here. If you want to say anything at any point, that obviously not repeating a point you've already made, then please do. But yes, I don't know whether Mr. Lee needs a bit of preparation time or whether he's just.
I've already spent quite a lot of time prepping for this. Some of which is no longer necessary.
That's where our frowny faces come in.
I'll say no more.
Ouch in both instances.
Anyway, right. So, sorry. Yeah, good point. Well, yeah. If the new members of, I think I've seen you all before, but if you want to introduce yourself, those who are maybe watching.
Hello, everyone. I'm James Shuttleworth of Salford City Council on behalf of GMCA.
Hi, Sarah Todd, Trafford Council for GMCA.
Thank you, and everyone else is here. I will, obviously, if you want to do your blurb, we'll do Salford, obviously separate to Trafford, and then if you want to do your blurb, but I think when you've done your blurb, logically, I know Peel said earlier that you were no longer wishing to challenge, I think it's GBA 29, but I guess you'll want to be around for the discussion, so I'll start with that. For what questions I've got, and then go on to any of the others, if that makes sense. But do you want, like you did with the Bury sites, do you want to go through them all in one big go?
In your hands entirely, sir. So
is it a similar sort of length, a similar?
It's going to be a bit longer because these are in all instances. So let me just get my list.
They're all both.
Yes, they're in the 3 instances that we're pursuing in Salford. They're both. So these will be the first fundamental change ones, if you like.
Okay, well, we'll do we'll do GBA 29 Land West of Burgess Farm on its own now, and then obviously once that's
Okay.
over and done with, if Peel wish to leave, they can.
Okie dokie, just give me one moment, sir. Let me just get the sheets for Land West of Burgess Farm. So I'm just slightly just having to just catch up with myself here. Forgive me for one moment. So in relation to, we're putting this on two bases, as you know, in relation to the boundary point. That's a straightforward point, which I can explain quite readily. The existing greenbelt boundary, this is for Land West of Burgess Farm, the existing greenbelt boundary follows the local authority boundary between Salford and Wigan rather than anything that you can see on the ground. So there's a local authority boundary, but nothing by way of any feature on the ground. And we would propose, by adding this land to the greenbelt, to ensure that there are strong boundaries around the greenbelt in this area. In relation to the fundamental change of circumstances, what's actually happened here, I'll just ask for a brief summary of that. It's in our matters statement.
Yes, so briefly, the change in circumstances are through the proposed allocation north of Mosley Common in Wigan. There's a reduction in the green belt in this location, and so we feel like that's a significant change in circumstances which warrants including the additional land to the green belt to mitigate the impact of the Mosley Common allocation. I suppose assuming that allocation progresses, then we think those circumstances have changed sufficiently to justify this mitigation.
Thank you. Okay, so in terms, we'll start with that fundamental change in circumstance. We've heard a few people talking about whether you should or shouldn't be using new greenbelt additions to compensate for loss of greenbelt elsewhere. So you're saying that's a change in circumstance. Where does that fit into, if you like, the national policy on identifying new greenbelt addition?
This is really a point about the law rather than policy, because policy simply refers to exceptional circumstances for additions to the greenbelt without actually, as far as I'm concerned, without actually helping us any further by way of giving you any guidance as to what that means. There's lots of guidance about where you're taking land away from out of the greenbelt, as I said earlier on in my little introductory piece. But in terms of adding land to the greenbelt, the framework, to be frank, doesn't help other than to state the exceptional circumstances test. And so one looks at the law, and I've given my distillation of the legal principle. So the fundamental change here is obviously that we're now dealing with a situation where, through Places for Everyone, and I'll come to an area-specific point in a few moments' time, but there is a proposed allocation which would remove land from the greenbelt, as you know, in the vicinity. And so there are two different forms, at least two different forms of compensation stroke mitigation type arguments which could be made, one of which we are making and one of which we're not making. So let me just explain. So one could, as was referred to earlier on by some of the speakers in the Bury session, one could have sort of said, well, look, Places for Everyone is taking X hectares out of the greenbelt and allocating it, and just as a sort of, I don't know, a broad brush sort of quid pro quo, therefore, to mitigate that, one should add a similar amount of land to the greenbelt. And that's not a case that we're making. That's not the way we're putting it. What we've done in our review, and it has been rigorous, of these various proposed greenbelt additions is to see, in relation to fundamental changes, where we're, as in this case, arguing a mitigation stroke compensation from removing land from the greenbelt and allocating it, whether there's an area-specific point. And so, the map is in our you would have seen you would have seen in our matter statement, we've got maps for all of these propositions, and so here there is there is an area-specific mitigation or compensation point about the separation. Well, as you know, the local authority boundary, we've got Wigan on the one side and Salford on the other. Parts of Salford, parts of Wigan, one side to the other side of the allocation on the one hand, and the Greenbelt addition as well on the other. So in that gap between settlements, we will be removing relatively extensive area of Greenbelt and allocating it, if that allocation goes through, of course. And it's to mitigate or compensate to an extent for that, that's the fundamental change point. And it's an area-specific point. It's not a broad brush, make up the numbers type point. On top of all of that, as I've said, and in addition to it, we do have this non-existent boundary point.
Yeah, so you're arguing that it's a maintaining, because effectively a Greenbelt purposes point, you're maintaining or seeking to minimise the impact on the Greenbelt purpose by adding some land that fills part of the gap.
That's basically. Yes, whether mitigation or compensation, which one of those is the right word to use, but the theme is, and it's an area, as I've said, I want to stress, it's an area-specific point. So the gap between two parts of, between two areas, each of which is part of a bigger conurbation, the gap is to be reduced by one of the allocations, and in that gap we would seek to some extent mitigate or compensate for that by adding this area of land to the Greenbelt. So it's a very area-specific point.
Okay, on the boundary, yes, so again, it might be some the history of the boundary and why it's necessarily there is to, and
heavens only knows, to be quite frank. I mean, it's very odd. I mean, I really have I've been trying to get my head around some of this, but I mean, the one we dealt with before, which is different from this, obviously, but, why one would draw a boundary through a pond, why would one draw a boundary along I suppose a local authority boundary makes sense in a way, but it doesn't actually make sense when you're looking for the broad level it does, but it doesn't really make sense when you're saying, well, we need some form of feature to mark out the boundary of the Greenbelt. So it is all rather odd,
And from your assessment, the new boundary, if you like, does follow. Yes. It does follow features. What those features are? Looking from the aerial photos.
Yeah. So the new boundary follows essentially railway, and then there's a area shown in green, but it's actually a new development site. It's progressing forward. We're sort of doing I think reserve matters at the moment. There's information in there.
And then, so that's the northern boundary. So coming down from the east, that's all goes around just the existing residential.
Follows the existing residential. Yeah.
And so that existing sort of line is literally just through fields and
there's nothing on the ground that would indicate it.
Okay, thank you. I had obviously a few questions in relation to RMIQs about openness and the effects of the wastewater treatment works and things of that nature. I guess from your earlier submissions, there's not probably anything to really go to. I've got your statement on that.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And your position is your position. And similarly, obviously, on the adequacy or otherwise of existing policies and so on. So we won't need to go there. That's on that basis. That's all I've really got to say about that. Does the appeal wish to add anything? Say anything?
The point we make is obviously our position is dependent on the allocation at Mosley Common. So that probably goes without saying that's. I think, to be clear, it's the anomalous boundary point that we accept.
Okay, so I did wonder, because obviously, in your statements you did refer to nothing has fundamentally changed since 1984. So it's, I take the point, okay, so it's the boundary. That's useful to clarify. Just on that point, and obviously, this is all without prejudice and everything else, if any point the Moseley Common allocation were to fall away, then that would have an impact on this as well. Yeah.
It would remove one of the two justifications that we have.
But the anomalous boundary would remain.
But the anomalous boundary would remain, as we would still make the anomalous boundary point. Obviously, I've heard what my learned friend said, and you'll take all of that on board. But yes, we're running the point on two bases, but if one of them goes, we still have the other one. As far as we're concerned, obviously, then others might have different views about that, but that would be our position.
Okay, thank you. Anything else anybody wants to say on that one? No, we'll move on then. So we'll go back then to the start of the ones you're. Oh no, sorry, I should have asked, but I'm assuming not the case because of who's here and what comments have been made previously about. If anyone's got any comments about the two, I think that Salford are not seeking to, if you like, press your case home for this. Any of those? I'm assuming you're okay with west of. Get the West Salford Greenway. That's right, isn't it? You're okay with that? I think I've called it other things.
It's the one that Peel were most interested in, perhaps the Greenway.
Okay. All right. On the basis, we will stick just to the three that you're seeking to stick to. So we've done 29. So we'll go back to 26. If you want to just introduce that one.
Yes, thank you. So this is again both fundamental change and anomalous boundary. So taking the anomalous boundary point. The existing greenbelt boundary doesn't follow any obvious features on the ground. I think this is my favourite new boundary because the new boundary to the greenbelt would follow what I think must be the strongest boundary one could imagine, which is the perimeter road of a prison. So that's not too bad. In relation to the fundamental change, this, as you'll know from our matter statement, the land in question was occupied at the time when the Greenbelt was previously considered was occupied by cooling towers associated with the Agecroft Power Station. Those have subsequently been demolished. They were demolished in 1994, and one has therefore a position where one could understand why what was done as a matter of principle in the past, but now we do have a fundamental change of circumstances in that there are some whacking great big cooling towers which were there, which are no longer there. We also have this point about the boundary being just not following features on the ground. So in summary, that's the fundamental change on the one hand, and the anomalous boundary on the other. Obviously, the contribution of the area of land to the Greenbelt has been assessed, and it's found that there would be a moderate contribution in relation to the purpose A, urban sprawl, or checking unrestricted sprawl. So there's a change of circumstances. I can't believe for one moment that had the cooling towers not been there when the Greenbelt was originally looked at, that one would have ended up where we are today. Anyway, the cooling towers have gone, and there's a non-existent boundary which will be traded for a very strong boundary.
Okay, yeah, I think that one's fairly clear. I think there have been obviously some obvious changes on the ground, and I think it was obviously, yes, it's not unlike others where you might say, well, why was the boundary drawn as it was in 1984? It seems fairly straightforward on that one. Just almost like a point of interest, but also just for my understanding, the Slackbrook open space, was that pre-existing, or was that created as part of any demolitions or as a result of? Because when you look at, again, the aerial photographs, that area you're talking about does seem to flow into with the tracks and everything else. It looks like it's part of the open space, isn't it? Yeah.
I think it's been included within the open space since the cooling towers and the Agecroft Cemetery.
So that was already there, but it's been incorporated.
The wider space was there, but that's been included. So when they came down, there was probably a period when it wasn't effectively part of it, but now it's completely indistinguishable. And it goes as well as the access road. It also, even more defensible, I suppose, is the prison boundary itself. Yeah. It's the boundary there. So.
And the existing boundary to the north, if you like, or your north-northeast, that runs to the side of the, obviously you've got the Bury Salford, looking at the map is Bury Salford and the water feature running through, and it just comes slightly south of that. So is that just on the banks?
I think it was kind of on the banks. It's funny it took that line on the banks in '84, but I think it's that
rather than the actual
river.
itself.
Which probably helps our case now.
Well, quite, because you would think North Bank, South Bank, but no, sort of a metre or two, going through some. And I've not been on the site that one yet, but presumably there's literally nothing. There's no fencing
on the ground now. You won't be able to spot that line.
And I think, as you say, the change in circumstance and the anomalous boundary sort of roll into one there, don't they? So I've got. Have I got anything else to ask on this one? No. Any comments on that one? No? Okay. So then, GBA 28 North Logistics, part of Logistics North Country. Things might be similar, isn't it? Similar. Well, not.
I put my mic on. Is that the first time I've forgotten it in all these weeks? Yes, I mean, if you've got our matter statement, there are maps. This is a real brain teaser here, because we've got 3 local authorities in play for this piece of land. Obviously Salford, God bless them, and then Bolton, and then Wigan. And in terms of fundamental changes, I mean, what's happened since the Greenbelt was originally and last considered and so on, is that we have a country park which has come as part of a wider development that has within its area land which is within the Greenbelt, but it also has this within Salford. Some of the park is in the Greenbelt, but this pocket of land, or this rectangle of land that's part of the country park, isn't in the Greenbelt. In addition, in terms of boundaries, there's nothing really on the ground to distinguish between the part of the park that's in the Greenbelt and the part of the park that isn't in the Greenbelt in Salford. And it just seems to be honest, it does seem to be pretty straightforward. The change of circumstances is the coming of the park. And you couple that then with the fact that the coming of the park, which is mostly in the Greenbelt, but has this one bit of park which isn't in the Greenbelt in Salford, you couple that with the fact that there's nothing on the ground to tell you when you're having fun in the park or whatever you're doing in the park, that you're, one footstep in the Greenbelt and next footstep not in the Greenbelt. So, and we would end up with boundaries which would make sense as a result of the proposed addition. So, yeah, so that's it really. And this. And go on, yes.
The other thing to mention is in the Bolton allocations plan, I think 2011, that also amended the Greenbelt boundaries, so they now run immediately to the parcel we're proposing, but then stop. So again, there's a logic there.
So thank you. That is a very helpful
addition.
Yes, so to the immediate west of the proposed addition, you now have Greenbelt that you didn't have when all of this was looked at originally in Salford. Yeah.
So just to confirm, that area immediately to the west, which is newish Greenbelt, that is in the country park as well, is that? Yeah. Yes, okay. And the land immediately to the north, obviously when you look at the aerial photos of what you've provided in the written statement, it's a bit of a mess at the moment, insofar as understanding where the boundaries will be. So where you've drawn the boundary, if you like, is that some kind of known, or obviously the aerial photos might be a little bit behind reality, and B, is it sort of clear from your, I guess, any planning document, you know where there's going to be a line and you know that it's, shall we say, there's a requirement to create a defensible boundary or something like that. We don't want to be coming back in 40 years' time and someone saying, well, who would have possibly thought of putting a Greenbelt boundary in that
Mr.
area?
Lee up to exactly. He drew a Greenbelt boundary through the middle of a
field.
Park, yeah.
No, I think it makes sense. It's the southern boundary of the new logistics site and the southern boundary of the existing employment site in Salford, so that does make sense.
Okay. Yeah, so I think you've probably picked up, and again, this is one of the more clear ones in terms of something that has physically changed. Presumably the country park was required. I mean, this would have all, depending on the way the question would have gone in terms of adequacy of policy and controls and things, thinking about, Country Park presumably delivered through a 106, and so, there's an element there of protection or requirement. So.
Not, I mean, I appreciate why questions have been asked by your good selves about why the normal planning, whatever the planning policies are which apply to the land in question, aren't really up to scratch, if you like.
Well, it flows from the topic paper which set it out against 139, which set...
Sure, and I've made my position very clear, which obviously 139 is about brand new green belts as opposed to adding land to the green belt. I think pertinently, this, of the various green belt additions that we are pressing, if you like, this is a good example where, in terms of an assessment of the contribution of the land in question to the purpose of the green belt, this fares pretty well, frankly. Moderate, strong, moderate. So, there's that case to make. But, as I've stressed, that's all very interesting. But one has to ask, well, what's fundamentally changed from, when this is all originally looked at or last looked at? And you have our case about fundamental. It's a double whammy of fundamental changes. It's the park, and it's also the neighbouring green belt.
So, and the park carries on south, is that, sorry?
And it carries on
south. Yeah, it carries on. So that the current existing boundary straddles, it goes through the middle of the park. Well, just again, for my own fullness, because obviously the information shows it to be churned up. And so is the area agricultural before?
I don't know exactly. I think there presumably was about some boundary, because the boundary looks odd now, but the park has reprofiled and redesigned the whole area, so it's progressed well beyond the aerial photos now.
Okay, CPR, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to make the point about the Manchester Mosses NIA. Although it's not a green belt purpose, the boundary of that site, the site is located on the Great to Manchester. I'm just looking at the Natural England plan that's been provided. It's not an issue of peat, but it is an issue of ecology.
And so is that you saying a case in favour of it coming greenbelt?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, okay. It's just so thank you. Right, I don't think I've got any other points. Any other points on that one? No. So I think that takes us to Trafford, does it? Do you want a minute? A second?
Yes, just a few moments, sir. So bear with me for just a few ticks. Yes. Fine.
Okay, yes, so there's only the one in Trafford, and you are...
That's number 43.
And you are, yes, fundamental change.
And this is a fundamental change. So, so this is, well, as you'll know, 2.7 hectares of open land, and it is located adjacent to the proposed new Carrington allocation, of which you've heard a great deal. Doubtless more to come. And the addition is located on the eastern edge of a large area of protected open land, safeguarded for future development by the core strategy. The allocation, New Carrington, includes all of the existing safeguarded land in Trafford and proposes it for development. The parcel that we're talking about, this addition, is not within the allocation boundary, and it would therefore actually be the only area of protected open land remaining to be safeguarded under policy R4.7 in Trafford. And that designation, frankly, wouldn't, as far as we're concerned, make sense given the small size of the parcel, 2.7 hectares. It hasn't, the land in question hasn't been included in the New Carrington allocation. As it happens, the landowner in question isn't supportive of development, and they're actually in support of the designation of their land as greenbelt out of interest, although that's not obviously one doesn't do it on that basis. And you'll know that there is, a considerable amount of greenbelt release which is proposed, and this small amount of additional adding land to the greenbelt we see as, based on the fundamental change of circumstances that's arisen here through or would arise, forgive me, through the new Carrington allocation, leaving the sort of stranded remaining very small amount of protected open land, which doesn't really sort of make any real sense in planning terms. So circumstances are certainly, the word fundamentally changed. The words fundamentally changed really do fit the bill here, with a very large allocation adjacent and with an extensive amount of greenbelt release proposed. So there's quite a bit of change on in circumstances, and the existing boundary follows existing physical features. The proposed new boundary would follow existing physical features. We're not making a boundary point about this one. It's, the new boundary would be a good boundary. The existing boundary is a good boundary. It's rather this fundamental change of circumstances in the wider picture here. Again, very, very adjacent. Very much in the vicinity of the site, though, obviously. So that's it. I mean, it's an odd one, this, if you like, but the oddity arises from a planning designation that would have made sense some time ago, but would no longer make sense if the new Carrington allocation is, survives the process. So that's it in a few words. Was there anything you wanted to add? No, that's it in a nutshell.
Okay. I think this point fits into the question of fundamental change, and that is the written statement says that the land needs to be redesignated as something other than safeguarded land or open land to give certain impairments in accordance with MPPF 143F. I suppose my question is, why does it need to be? I mean, it could be, could it be just undesignated countryside? Is it automatic that it would go from safeguarded land to greenbelt? Is there not another option there?
Well, there would be an option of. I'll look to my left as to whether Trafford has a sort of general or generic countryside protection policy. It doesn't. So in good old-fashioned terms, well, certainly from when I started doing this job a long time ago, it would be what would be described as white land, presumably, in those circumstances. That is to say
Me too, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, but no, I mean, it's the major allocation. It's the extensive greenbelt release adjacent to this. It's leaving this. I don't even know whether you'd call it an island. I mean, it would be a very small and very odd piece of protected open land surrounded by, the greenbelt. Well, with the greenbelt to its east and south, and the allocation to its north. So there you are.
And so, in terms of the argument on Moseley, JPA 35, the one we just had in Salford, where it's on the other side of the greenbelt, and therefore is maintaining helping to maintain gaps and greenbelt purposes. It's the same. I mean, some of this is this is quite small, but would the same argument apply? Is this purely? I mean, almost the fundamental change. You're not making an anomalous boundary argument, but it isn't. Still, would seem to me the fundamental change is leading to an anomalous situation, if not a boundary.
Yes, I think if I might say, I think describing it as an anomalous situation is a very good way of describing it. I think hand on heart, we can't really say this is well, if it is mitigation or compensation, it's a very small mitigation and a very small compensation, because the extent of greenbelt release involved at Carrington, and this is a small amount of land, 2.7 hectares. Yes, but the anomalous situation is a good way of putting it, and the anomalous situation arises from the fundamental change of making the allocation, releasing lots of greenbelt land, and having this this pocket of protected open land with the allocation on two sides and the green belt on the other two sides. So that's...
And would that fit into the legal, as far as you look at the legal?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
Yes. I having looked at this rigorously, and we as a team have been very have applied the case law to all of these additions. That's why we are where we are today.
I'm more thinking about me creating new definitions of things.
No. I think you could say. I think as long as one describes the anomalous situation as an anomalous situation which arises from the fundamental change of circumstances of making a very major allocation immediately adjacent to this, what would become a leftover pocket of protected open land, with the green belt to two sides and the allocation, which involves a major green belt release in its own right, to the other two sides. And as long as the anomalous situation is described as arising from that fundamental change of circumstances, no, you won't be creating any new law. Although, I mean, why not?
Well, why not, indeed. I suppose the other point would be is that it's not in the allocation. So from a site, I mean, I'm not loath to get into those sorts of things, but from a boundary perspective, is that, well, why not in the allocation then? If it's got to be something other than
well, why not have brought into the allocation? I mean, that's again, I wouldn't know the answer off the top of my head. I think there was, I don't know the answer. I'm not going to guess the answer. I think I might know it, but I'll look to my left. Any particular reason why this little bit of land wasn't brought into the allocation?
It could be included in the allocation. I think we were looking to minimise greenbelt loss as much as possible, and we knew this land wasn't available for development.
Thank you. Not available. Thank you. So many questions not to ask. So I will ask CPRE if there any what they want to say. Thank you.
As you know, CPRE isn't supportive of the proposed New Carrington allocation, but we would argue this site stands on its own feet and could be included in the green belt without the linked case being made.
Okay, understood. So, but in any event, you're supportive of the proposal. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think that covers me then. That was a short session. So, any other final comments on any of what I've been talking about before I bring today to a potentially early adjournment? So, yes, obviously there may be points we obviously need to think about whether there's anything else we need to come back on any of these things. But other than that, we will, I guess, adjourn now until, when is it? 27th?
28th.
28th of March.
If you were here on the 27th, you might be here on your own.
28th of March for more greenbelt additions and potentially other things. So,
and whatever else it is.
We beg your pardon, CPRE.
On programming, I spoke to Yvonne earlier and she actually indicated there may be some flux in the date, so everyone should keep an eye on the programme.
Yeah, well, I think generally everyone should keep an eye on the programme.
Oh, sorry, I'm being confused. I'm thinking of the monitoring day, actually.
Monitoring, well, at the moment, that's not changing as far as, but yes, keep an eye on it. Obviously, with what we've heard today, whether we will need a full day to talk about the remainder of the greenbelt additions is debatable. But there may be other things from our other notes that we may want to raise, but we need to make a decision on that and feedback as soon as possible. So, but that is, we're aware of that. So, yes, keep an eye on it, but obviously keep disruption to a minimum. So, I assume that means you want to come to talk about monitoring.
Yes.
That'd be one then. So I look forward to that. I'm leading that.
So being practical, on the Tuesday we've got Oldham, Rochdale and Tameside, and we have 2 in Rochdale, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in 2, 3, 4, 6 in 7 in Tameside. Good heavens, they're growing by the moment every time I look at the sheet. So we've got 8 even. Oh, I'm going to give up trying to count.
A lot. A lot in Tameside.
It seems like it's been a long
Another-
day.
another
although
one
it's
of
been
mine.
A short day. Another one of yours. So, but I mean, patiently, you know, we would definitely get all of those done before lunch, I would have thought, on that day. And so the idea, it seems, it may well be that we might be doing something else in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Subject
I think
to
obviously-
advice. Subject to advice.
Well, it may well, obviously,
Yeah.
yes. I think we need to make sure we're doing things efficiently as well. So
Indeed.
we'll
And then
look at
on
it
the
again.
Wednesday, we've currently got monitoring, and hopefully we'll still have monitoring. And again, I don't suppose that's going to be a very long set. Well, I don't know. Who knows? Is that one of yours, sir, or it is?
Depends how many questions you ask.
Exactly. I don't know what you think about that, whether you're thinking that might mean it's a short session or a long session.
I couldn't possibly comment, sir.
Just disappointed I've not managed to get all my questions and say. Anyway, all right, so, okay, we'll adjourn then until the 28th of March, and thank you all again for your contributions today, and safe journey home if the weather's inclement. Thank you.